All right. So we're going to continue on our march down comics history and let's go into the 90s. What would you like to talk about from there?
There's so much to talk about the 90s. Obviously, this is the era in which I was born and when I started reading comics. I think it's best to kind of focus, at least in the Marvel area, on the late 90s when they started with the Heroes Return, which was basically, to make a long story short, Marvel was going through a whole lot of changes. They had outsourced their entire comics line to a couple of folks who formed Image, and things were all over the place, to say the least. They did a second restoration, I would say, after that called Heroes Return, and that's where they brought all the heroes back to the main Marvel Earth, and they just rebooted all the series back to number one. And the one that really, really struck me the most was Avengers by Kurt Busiek and George
Hmm.
Perez. So another George Perez series here. But as a kid, seeing all the Avengers together like this, all these superheroes, teaming up, and there's a romance, a soap, it's a soap basically with superheroes. And so that was what really drew me in was the Vision, the Scarlet Witch, Wonder Man, Love Triangle, and all the different characters interacting. So Avengers by Kurt Busiek and George Perez. It's collected in trade paperback and omnibus format. I've got like 10 different versions of it. I seriously read that until like the staples fell out of the comic when I was a kid. Can't say enough
But
good things.
no, no doubt. I remember. So when I was in high school, we could leave for lunch. And so the closest place to get lunch was a pizzeria. And so if you had a friend who had a car, you could get there definitely in time and stuff. But also right next to it was a comic book store. And yes, so when I was lucky enough to get someone to say, "Hey, Chris, you want to go for lunch?" I would go along for them, but I would be like, "You can go get some pizza. I'm going to go to the comic book store." And I vividly remember getting so much of those comics from the Heroes Return era. So that's where my lunch money went. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, you can always leave. You can eat later, right? I mean,
Yes, I'm going to go home anyway in a couple hours. So at least get some comic books and it makes it easier for everyone.
yeah.
The things we do for our hobbies.
So, I think this is another good reference point for the 90s. The animated series for Batman the animated series was huge, right? Like
Mhm.
this was still today, it's revered. Kevin Conroy's voice as Batman is iconic, and there was so many great things that were introduced in Batman the animated series, and one of the most notable ones would be the character of Harley Quinn. And so I think it's a bit of a cheat to say the Batman Adventures comic, which is based on the show, which is based on the comic, but I think there was so much that that show changed for the industry, and so
Mhm.
many people still look to that show for inspiration and kind of as a high mark. So I wanted to include that on the list, even though it's adaptation of an adaptation.
But like for an adaptation of an adaptation, you don't want to discount it because a lot of the comic book versions, like, a license of a cartoon show or whatever, they just kind of seem like something that's concurrent to it. But a lot of those Batman adventure books, they felt like they could have been an episode of the animated series. So that like visually they were in that they look the same. The writing, like the how they presented things, how stories unfolded felt so it was more of a companion to it, I felt, than just a standalone.
Well, yeah, and they also followed that episodic format, right? A lot of them were going
Mhm.
to be one and done issues where there's a beginning, middle, and end within the cover of the book that you just picked
Right.
up. And I think there needs to be more of that in comic book storytelling where you can get a solid 20 pages of story and feel
Mhm.
satisfied and want to come back for more without feeling like you're left on a cliffhanger every month.
That's very true. Well, because I think it's easier to keep interest in it because I even know with the stuff that I read that it's like, how long is the story going to end? Or I don't know if I want to finish this. Whereas, it's a one or even a two-issue story arc. It's enough to keep me going and that I don't feel like I have to constantly reread things.
Yeah, I'm reading a lot more miniseries these days because I just find that I know when I know where the end is, I can and I'm
Right.
starting and I'm enjoying, I can kind of say, okay, this is going to be over in 3 or 4 issues. I'm along for the ride. But if it's something where it's an open ended, I don't know where this is going. Does the writer know where it's going? Does the editorial team know where it's going? Then it can be
Mhm.
hard to stick around, for 30, 40, 50 issues if it makes it that way.
Yeah. And then sometimes you look back at it and like a good maybe 20% of those issues wasn't necessary.
Well, if we want to talk about it, how much of comics is necessary? It's all necessary, right? It's all art. Art is necessary for us, but I don't so much subscribe to the idea of like things have to count as I used
Mhm.
to, where I'm like, well, if it's in continuity, I'll read it. I don't care about that as much. I'm looking for the
No.
stories.
Oh, I get that. I guess what I'm talking about is that, one of these, it's a series that it's very continuity issue to issue based. And then there was like, well, this whole subplot really went nowhere and didn't kind of contribute to anything. It just felt like somebody really wanted to tell a story about this theme, or they really wanted to draw skyscrapers.
You don't like the Peter Parker as a high school teacher subplots, or
Although maybe it's because I'm older. Whatever. Sometimes like the stories as Peter as an adult seemed much more interesting than when he was just awkward teenager. And I think even when I was a kid, I felt that way too. Like,
I mean, it's
it's all subjective. And I think that's the joy of comics is that like you can have Spider-Man doing both. You can have stories, and I also think it's the other point that you can too is that if you don't like the direction of a character or what the current thing is, there's always more than enough stuff that you've probably never seen that you can go back to.
that's a great point. There's no use in getting upset about a current direction of a character when there's probably decades worth of material that you haven't looked at, or there's still more stories to come on the other side. One of the next ones that I picked out for the 90s, and this was a series that started in the 80s, but I think the majority of it was going to take place through the 90s, is Sandman. And
Mhm.
I just, if you haven't read Sandman, you got to go and change that. It's going to make you have nightmares. It's going to change how you look at the comic book storytelling format, but those are all good things, I think.
Oh, yeah, I can't not recommend it. I think shout out to the libraries. We have in East Brunswick Public Library, we have them all on our shelves. We also have, you can download them all on Hoopla Digital. So you can, if you want to read it, there is no reason you should not be reading it.
Yeah.
Which is your favorite arc from the Sandman?
So the serial convention, the one that I've read so far, I've not made it all the way through the series, but
Dude, you're killing me here.
hey, look, I've got a really big reading list. Okay,
I
you
know,
can see
I
from my
know.
office how much is going on here.
There's a lot.
I work in comics, which means I don't really get much time to spend reading comics. It's the dirty secret of the industry is that we're all in the industry because we love reading comics so much, and then once you're in the industry, you don't have time to read anymore. So
No, I could see how that would be a problem.
So yeah, the one where there are all the serial killers are at the hotel, and that whole story arc is the one that I really like the most.
That's a good one. I like, yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with any of that. I like the Deaths miniseries that are the offshoots of it, because I just love the concept that the physical embodiment of the concept of death is a very cheerful young woman. And I like the stories of her interacting with people and trying to make their lives better on the one day a year for whatever 100 years it is that she can interact with mortals.
I also I have the Death hardcover. I still have it in the shrink wrap because I haven't gotten to it yet. But the other story I liked from Sandman was the character that he visits like once every 100 years. And so he goes and he just has like oh, hey, how's it going? You're immortal because I liked having a conversation with you. How has your life changed? And this, this time he's like miserable. He's lost everything. And then 100 years later, he's like,
yeah,
super rich because he invented something and was able to inherit his own, his own wealth again by pretending to be his own son. There's just like a lot of cool concepts there where, what would life really be like if somebody who was immortal had access to talking to the personification of dreams?
It is. Did you like the show on Netflix?
I haven't checked it out.
I haven't yet either. And I know this sounds terrible and stuff. Like, I'll like it no matter what. Like, and I love watching different adaptations of these properties, whether I wind up loving it or hating it or somewhere in the middle. But I think it's because I love the original source material so much. I'm so afraid of it not ending right, or I don't know. So it's like, I'm like, you know what? I'm cool with it. And I'm sure it's wonderful. But yeah.
You have to watch all new movies and TV shows multiple times at the week it comes out if you ever want to see more of it. That's the thing now, right? You got to watch
I know
100 hours of Sandman in the first 12 weeks, otherwise it doesn't count. Now, I don't look, it's hard to keep up with everything. If you are a writer or you have a full-time job or you have just a family, trying to watch things the week they come out,
right.
that's very difficult. But hoping to get to check out the Sandman series at some point because it looks delightful.
Yes, it does. Again, I haven't watched it, but I've seen the YouTube trailer, whatever things they put out, the occasional press shots they do, and it looks good. But I'm just weak, Ron. And maybe what we'll do is we'll get back and do a watch along, and we'll see if we can do this together.
That might be cool.
All right. So anything else in the 90s that you want to talk about?
think that's it for me. You know, there's a whole bunch of the 90s that people don't like referencing and talking about. I'm not going to go into things that I don't like. I think the best way to spend your energy in comics is to find the things that make you happy.
And that's like, yeah, I totally know what you mean. Like, there's so much stuff out there. And like, I, never complain about someone's like, oh, well, why don't you like this? It's like, oh, I don't like it, but that's cool that you like it. I mean, if it's, again, it's art, it's all subjective. It's going to, and then that's the other part of it too, is that like, it's like ice cream. You may like mint chocolate chip and I love chocolate chip cookie dough, but we all like ice cream and, it's the same thing. So if you're spending money in a comic book store, that means other stuff gets printed and published. So it's high tides, right? Raise all shit.
And I do love mint chocolate chip, so
It's the best. Now, now see if we can still be friends. Do you like green mint chocolate chip or the white mint chocolate chip?
Why not both?
Good point.
I'm not going to pick and choose if I get mint chocolate chip. As someone who's lactose intolerant, I don't really get much of a choice.
Oh, no.
Beyond the general like vanilla and chocolate flavors that are lactose free. So if I get mint chocolate chip, I'm just taking it.